This was the fourth time that week she'd taken my mail. I watched her do it from my front window. Same mint green cardigan, same canvas tote bag, same unhurried walk back to her house like she hadn't just helped herself to my envelopes for the fourth time in 5 days. My HOA president, my neighbor, my mail. While she was doing this, she was also sending me $150 weekly fines for parking my work van in my own driveway. I was losing clients, missing deadlines, nearly losing the business I'd spent a decade building, and I had no idea why until I checked my security footage. She was the criminal. I was the one paying penalties. 7 years of zero accountability will make a person very, very sloppy. She forgot one thing. Stealing U.S. mail is a federal felony, and I kept every single piece of evidence. What would you do? Drop where you're watching from, because this one doesn't end the way she planned. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you how this ends. My name is Broderick Callahan. Broad, to anyone who actually likes me. Mid-50s, former union electrician, now running my own small electrical contracting business out of my home in Sycamore Creek Estates, Columbus, Ohio. About 140 houses, mature oaks that go gold every October. The kind of neighborhood where everybody recognizes everybody's truck, kids still ride bikes to the end of the street, and you genuinely believe, right up until you don't, that your neighbors are fundamentally decent people. I'd been here 11 years, raised my daughter here after the divorce, coached Little League 4 seasons straight. Every single winter, without being asked once, I shoveled the driveway of my neighbor, Mrs. Ketterer, 81 years old, 5 feet tall, and sharp enough to make most people half her age feel slow. She never had to ask. She never had to thank me either, though she always did. Usually with a tin of something baked and a look that said she'd been watching people her whole life and had me figured out in the first week. I am, by any reasonable measure, a good neighbor. Tuesday mornings have their own particular quiet out here. Sprinklers hissing in overlapping arcs across front lawns. The distant yip of somebody's terrier 2 streets over. The muted whump of a car door that never quite latches right. The smell of cut grass and something faintly metallic in the air. The way Ohio mornings smell before the heat really commits. The kind of stillness that makes you think nothing bad happens in places like this. That stillness was her camouflage. Constance Birchfield Holt, early 60s, retired school administrator, HOA board president for 7 consecutive years, not because anyone voted for her enthusiastically, but because nobody wanted the job badly enough to run against her. She drove a spotless white Cadillac SUV that she parked exactly 6 inches over my property line every single time she visited the mailbox area. Not because she needed the space, because she wanted you to know she could. Here is what took me too long to understand about Constance. She never yelled, never pounded on doors. Her power was quieter and far more corrosive. She spoke in the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who had spent 30 years writing disciplinary memos, every sentence pre-lawyered, every word chosen to foreclose argument. She knew the HOA bylaws better than the attorney who drafted them. She used that knowledge like a scalpel, small cuts, carefully placed, in spots that hurt without looking like wounds. There was always a faint trace of her perfume near the cluster mailboxes, something warm and floral, the kind that clings to still air long after the person wearing it is gone. I noticed it for months before I understood what it meant. The first warning sign wasn't dramatic. My health insurance provider started sending notices about returned correspondence. Letters I never returned, never even received. A certified letter from a contractor arrived one afternoon with the seal slightly wrong, the adhesive a shade too fresh. I noticed. I told myself the post office was having a rough stretch. That was my first mistake. The moment everything got real was a Thursday in late July. A signed contract, $14,000 job, good client, hard 10-day deadline. It never arrived. 3 weeks later the client called. I had nothing. No contract, no explanation, no job. That night, I pulled up the Ring camera footage aimed at the cluster mailbox bank. Mint green cardigan, sunglasses, canvas tote, my neighbor, walking away with my livelihood in her bag, and smiling. I didn't storm over to her house. I didn't post anything on Facebook. I didn't leave a note in her mailbox. I made a phone call. Specifically, I called the United States Postal Inspection Service, the USPS, not the Post Office Customer Service line, not the local branch. The federal law enforcement arm of USPS, one of the oldest federal agencies in this country, founded in 1775 by Benjamin Franklin himself. These are the people who investigate mail theft, mail fraud, and mail tampering. And what Constance had been doing, intercepting, opening, and retaining first-class mail addressed to another person, falls squarely under 18 U.S. Code Section 1708, federal felony, up to 5 years per offense. I filed my complaint online at postalinspectors.uspis.gov, uploaded the ring camera footage, wrote a detailed timeline, dates, descriptions, estimated contents of each piece of mail I'd seen her take. The whole process took about 25 minutes. A confirmation number arrived in my email within 48 hours. Takeaway: filing a USPIS complaint is free, takes under 30 minutes, and puts federal investigators on official record as aware of your situation. Most people have no idea this option exists. I felt better for exactly 2 days. Then I walked to my mailbox on a Wednesday morning and found a small handwritten note tucked inside. No envelope, no signature, 6 words in careful block lettering. You should be more careful. I photographed it immediately, forwarded it to my USPIS case number that afternoon, added it to what I was already thinking of as the file, a manila accordion folder that was starting to get pleasantly thick. Here's the thing about a person who has operated without consequences for 7 years. They don't know how to be subtle when they feel threatened. They just escalate. Constance had spent a decade wielding HOA procedure like a weapon, and her instinct when cornered was to reach for the same tool. 3 days after the note appeared in my mailbox, she called an emergency board meeting. Not a regular meeting, an emergency session, invoking a provision in the CC and Rs that allowed the board president to convene a special meeting without the standard 14-day notice period. She sent emails to 11 of the 14 eligible board members. She did not send emails to 3 of them. Funny how that works. The meeting produced one new rule. Cluster mailbox areas were hereby designated as HOA common property, and the board reserved the right to manage access for community safety. The vote was recorded as unanimous in the published minutes. I found out about all of this through my neighbor Wendell, retired postal worker, 3 houses down, the kind of man who attends every HOA meeting and takes his own notes because he genuinely believes in community governance, and also, frankly, because he enjoys watching people make mistakes. He texted me a 2-paragraph summary that ended with, "Bro, she just made it a lot worse for herself. He was not wrong, but I needed proof. So I did something Constance had apparently never anticipated. I requested the HOA's governing documents. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 5312.10, homeowners in a planned community have a legal right to inspect and copy all association records, meeting minutes, financial statements, governing documents, the works. I sent a certified letter, return receipt requested, to Pinnacle Association Services, the third-party management company that administered Sycamore Creek's HOA, citing the statute directly. Pinnacle dragged its feet for 9 days. On day 10, I sent a follow-up letter noting that ORC Section 5312.10 required compliance within a reasonable time, and that I was prepared to pursue remedies if necessary. The documents arrived by the end of that week. 47 pages of HOA boilerplate. I read every single one. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table with a yellow highlighter, and went through them the way I'd once spent 4 days tracing a wiring fault through a 200-unit commercial building, methodically, without skipping anything, because the thing you're looking for is always in the section you almost didn't read. I found it in Article 11, Section 4. Board members were explicitly prohibited from taking any action constituting interference with the quiet enjoyment or legal rights of any homeowner. I underlined it twice, poured myself a second cup of coffee, read it 3 more times. Then I noticed something else. The published minutes from the emergency meeting said the vote was 11-0, but 14 board members were eligible to vote. 3 hadn't been notified. 3 votes simply didn't appear in the record. The minutes had been falsified. I closed the folder, looked out my kitchen window at the quiet street, and thought, she just handed me everything I need. Constance's next move came 8 days later, wrapped in the language of community safety, and delivered on official HOA letterhead. She installed a wooden parcel station near the cluster mailbox bank, a locked box mounted to a post, painted HOA beige, with a combination lock and a cheerful little sign that read, Sycamore Creek Package Management Station. Every homeowner received a letter explaining that all package deliveries would be redirected to this station to reduce porch piracy and protect community assets. Every homeowner except me received the access code. I stood at my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, reading the letter, smelling diesel from Teresa's mail truck idling 2 houses down, and I thought, she is genuinely not going to stop. What Constance did not know, and what I was about to find out, was that installing any structure that interferes with USPS mail delivery near a designated delivery point requires explicit written authorization from the United States Postal Service. You cannot simply bolt a box to a post next to a cluster mailbox bank because you feel like it. USPS Publication 52 and the Postal Operations Manual are very specific about what HOAs can and cannot do in the vicinity of postal delivery infrastructure. She had not gotten authorization. She had not asked for authorization. She had, in the confident manner of someone who had never been told no by anyone with actual authority, simply done it. I called the local postmaster that afternoon. He confirmed in writing, via follow-up email, which I printed and filed within the hour, that the parcel station had been installed without USPS approval, and that carriers had been instructed to bypass it entirely. Takeaway: any HOA structure installed within or adjacent to a USPS-designated delivery zone requires written postal authorization. Without it, the structure has no legal standing, and its removal can be compelled. I did not confront Constance. I did not call a neighbor. I typed a single, politely worded letter to Pinnacle Association Services. Certified mail, return receipt requested, naturally, informing them that the parcel station was unauthorized under federal postal regulations, attaching the postmaster's written confirmation, and requesting removal within 14 days. I copied the HOA's board attorney. The board attorney, a solo practitioner whose Zoom background suggested his office shared space with a storage unit, called me within 2 business days. He was not cheerful. He spoke in the careful, measured tone of a man who has just realized he is going to have to bill someone for a problem that was entirely avoidable, and who has a very good idea of who that someone is. He told me he would look into the matter. I thanked him warmly and hung up. The parcel station disappeared overnight, 11 days later. No announcement, no apology. Constance sent a letter to residents explaining the station had been temporarily removed for maintenance. I added the letter to the file. The accordion folder now required both hands to carry. Then she came at me from a different angle. A formal HOA violation notice arrived in my actual mailbox, delivered by Teresa, properly, the way mail is supposed to arrive, citing my white work van as a commercial vehicle, prohibited from visible driveway storage under the CC&Rs. $150. Remove the vehicle within 48 hours, or daily fines would begin accruing. I pulled out the CC&Rs. The commercial vehicle prohibition defined the restricted category as vehicles exceeding 10,000 pounds, GVWR, or bearing visible commercial advertising exceeding 2 square feet. My Ford Transit had a GVWR of 8,550 pounds. The magnetic door decals, which I removed every evening before parking, a habit I'd had for years, measured 1.8 square feet combined when laid flat. I had the vehicle spec sheet. I had a tape measure. I had photographs of the decals measured against a ruler, time-stamped, taken the same day the violation notice arrived. I sent a formal dispute letter to Pinnacle within 72 hours. Spec sheet attached, measurements attached, photographs attached, statute cited. The fine was rescinded 11 days later. No explanation offered. But here is what Constance didn't know was happening while she was filing violation notices and removing unauthorized parcel stations. The USPS complaint I'd filed 6 weeks earlier was no longer just sitting in a queue. An investigator had made quiet contact with the local post office. Teresa, 9 years on this route, sharp eyes, good memory, had been keeping her own informal log of anomalies near the cluster mailboxes. She hadn't said anything officially yet, but she would. Constance's next weapon was subtler and, in retrospect, significantly dumber. She created a private Facebook group, Sycamore Creek Homeowners Forum, official, and began posting. Not accusations. Never accusations. Constance was too careful for that. Instead, she posted what I can only describe as precision-targeted vagueness. Concerns about a homeowner operating an unlicensed business from a residential property. Worries about commercial vehicles creating safety hazards for children. A thoughtful meditation on the importance of consistent rule enforcement for community property values. She never typed my name. She didn't need to. Within 48 hours, 14 people had sent me screenshots. 2 other homeowners in the neighborhood ran home-based businesses with work vehicles in their driveways. A woman named Claudette operated a licensed home daycare with a passenger van. A man named Garrett owned a landscaping company and kept his truck and trailer parked out front 3 days a week. Neither had received a single violation notice. Both were, as it happened, close friends with Constance. The pattern was visible to everyone in the neighborhood, except, apparently, Constance herself. I made an appointment with an attorney, not a general practice attorney, a specialist in HOA law and community association disputes, found through the Ohio State Bar's referral service. The consultation cost $250 for 90 minutes and was, without question, the most valuable $250 I spent during this entire saga. What she told me reorganized everything. Ohio's Planned Community Act, ORC Section 5312, contains provisions allowing homeowners to bring civil action against an HOA or its officers for willful misconduct in rule enforcement. More importantly, she explained that discriminatory selective enforcement, applying rules to some homeowners while ignoring identical violations by others, exposes board members to personal liability. Not just the HOA as an entity, the individual board members themselves. Takeaway. Selective HOA enforcement isn't just unfair. In most states, it is legally actionable, and board members can be held personally liable when identical situations are treated differently based on personal preference. I went home and built a spreadsheet. Every commercial vehicle in the neighborhood, every work truck, contractor van, landscaping trailer, and delivery vehicle I could document with photographs and timestamps. Cross-referenced against the HOA violation records I now had under statutory right. 2 columns, red for violations issued, green for identical situations with no violation. The green column was considerably longer than the red column. Then I found something the attorney hadn't anticipated. Buried in the board meeting minutes from 14 months earlier were conflict of interest disclosure forms signed by 2 board members relating to a proposed landscaping contract. Standard procedure, nothing remarkable on its face, except that those same 2 board members had voted at Constance's improper emergency meeting, the one where 3 members weren't notified, on the mailbox access rule. The published minutes recorded the vote as 11-0, but there were 14 eligible voters. 3 weren't notified. 3 votes simply weren't in the record. 11 votes, not 14, not even close to 14. The minutes had been falsified, not sloppily, carefully, in the way someone falsifies records when they've been doing it long enough to feel confident. But the signatures on those disclosure forms were dated. The attendance records from the regular meetings were dated. The math didn't work, and I had the documents to prove it. I called my attorney back. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, and I remember the exact words, "That's not a mistake. That's a decision." Falsifying HOA meeting minutes in Ohio violates the association's fiduciary duties under ORC Section 5312.09 and exposes board officers to personal civil liability. We were no longer talking about a parcel station or a van in a driveway. We were talking about deliberate document fraud. My attorney sent a formal preservation of evidence letter to Pinnacle and to the HOA's board attorney the following week, demanding that all communications, logs, video footage, and financial records be preserved pending potential litigation. Constance received a copy. She stopped visiting the mailbox area the next day. Wendell noticed immediately and texted me a single word: interesting. I had one more thing to do before the picture was complete. I requested the HOA's financial records. Under the same ORC Section 5312.10 that got me the governing documents, I was entitled to the full financial history. Reserve fund balances, expenditure records, vendor contracts, the works. Pinnacle sent them without resistance this time. The board attorney had apparently had a conversation with someone. I sat down at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and started reading. I got through the first 12 pages before I stopped, set down my mug, and sat very still for a long time. Something was very wrong with the numbers. The HOA Reserve Fund should have had approximately $87,000 in it. It had $41,200. I went through the expenditure records line by line. Over 26 months, a series of payments had been made from the Reserve Fund to a single vendor, BCH Property Maintenance LLC. The amounts ranged from $800 to $4,400. 26 separate transactions. Total, $43,500. There was no contract on file, no board vote approving the expenditures, no work orders, no receipts, no photographs of completed work, no evidence anywhere in the record that BCH Property Maintenance LLC had ever done a single thing for Sycamore Creek Estates. I pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State Business Registry on my laptop. BCH Property Maintenance LLC. Registered in Ohio. Registered agent Constance B. Holt. Address: a UPS store box number in the next town over. Date of formation: the same month she became HOA board president, 7 years ago. BCH Birchfield Holt. I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. Outside, a kid rode a bike past my window. A sprinkler hissed somewhere down the street. The ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning in a neighborhood where 140 families were going about their lives, most of them unaware that their HOA Reserve Fund had been paying a shell company with their president's initials on it for 7 consecutive years. $43,500. Gone. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. She listened to everything without interrupting. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. Don't call anyone in the neighborhood. Don't post anything anywhere. And do not confront her." Her voice had shifted into a register I hadn't heard from her before. Focused and very quiet, the way people get when something has just become significantly more serious than it was a moment ago. She made 2 calls while I waited. One to a forensic accountant colleague, a former IRS agent named Gretchen, who charged $300 an hour and was, I would discover, worth considerably more than that. One to a colleague who specialized in white-collar matters, for a second opinion on how to proceed. The mail theft, the thing I'd been fighting for 3 months, suddenly looked different. Not smaller, just differently shaped. Constance hadn't been stealing my mail out of spite or pettiness, or the particular brand of neighborhood megalomania that produces HOA presidents like her. She'd been stealing it because I was a home-based business owner who paid attention to finances, asked questions at meetings, and might, given the right document on the right day, notice that $43,500 had been paid to a company that didn't exist. The mail theft was surveillance. It was sabotage. It was dressed up as pettiness so nobody would look too closely at what it was actually protecting. That evening I went out to my back deck. October was coming, and the oaks were doing that late summer thing where they hold the day's heat in their canopy and release it slowly after dark. The air smelled of cut grass and dry leaves, and something faintly electric from a storm building 3 counties west. I sat with a cold beer and thought about how long someone like Constance had been counting on the fact that nobody in this neighborhood was paying close enough attention. My daughter called while I was sitting there. She asked what I was thinking about. I said, "How much rope to give someone before you let them tie themselves up with it?" She was quiet for a second. Then, "Dad, don't do anything illegal." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Here is how you take down someone like Constance Birchfield Holt. You don't ambush her. You don't post about her. You don't leave a note in her mailbox telling her what you know. You build something she cannot dismantle. A structure made entirely of documented facts, statutory rights, and patient, methodical preparation. And then you walk her into it in front of witnesses. The team came together quietly over the following 3 weeks. Wendell, retired postal worker, 11 years on this street, institutional memory of everything that had happened in this neighborhood since before Constance arrived. He attended every HOA meeting, took his own notes, and had contacts at the local post office going back 30 years. He was also the person who baked the best pecan cookies in Columbus, Ohio, which would matter later for reasons that are entirely practical. Teresa, our mail carrier, 9 years on this route. She had been keeping a personal log, dates, times, observations near the cluster mailbox bank, because she had noticed things and believed, with the quiet professional conviction of someone who takes their federal oath seriously, that her log would eventually matter. She was right. Marcus and his wife Diane. Marcus was a CPA 3 streets over whose wife sat on the HOA board, one of the 3 members Constance had deliberately excluded from the emergency meeting. Diane had been quietly furious about HOA governance for 2 years. She was now actively furious, which is a more useful condition. Daphne, real estate attorney, 2 properties in the development, 11 years as a resident. She had been watching Constance's financial management with professional unease for 4 years, and had been waiting, with the particular patience of someone who knows exactly which statute applies to which situation, for the right moment to act. Gretchen, the forensic accountant, spent 2 weeks going through every financial record I could provide. Her findings arrived in a 40-page report that read like a very calm, very thorough detonation. BCH Property Maintenance LLC had no contractor's license in Ohio, no business phone number in any public directory, no website, no reviews anywhere online, no evidence of any kind that it had ever performed any work for anyone. $43,500 paid to a shell company bearing the HOA president's initials across 26 transactions over 26 months, with no documentation of any kind. Takeaway: HOA reserve fund expenditures in Ohio must be approved by board vote with supporting documentation. Unexplained payments can be reported directly to the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Law Section, which has specific jurisdiction over nonprofit HOA finances. Daphne filed the complaint with the AG's office on behalf of herself and 4 other homeowners who had signed authorizations. Standard process. The AG's office sent a written acknowledgement. Daphne put that letter in a manila envelope, wrote nothing on the outside, and set it aside for later. She had a specific plan for that envelope. The venue for everything was the annual Sycamore Creek Estates Fall Homeowners Meeting. 3rd Saturday of October, mandatory public session, all 140 homeowners entitled to attend and speak. Under the CC&Rs, it was the one meeting at which homeowners could formally demand a financial accounting from the board. Constance had run these meetings for 7 years, with the practiced ease of someone who controls the agenda, the clock, and the microphone. This year would be different. My attorney prepared a formal homeowner's demand for financial accounting under ORC Section 5312.10, requiring the board to produce all records and respond to questions at the annual meeting. We served it on Pinnacle and the board attorney 10 days in advance, certified mail, return receipt requested, so there could be no claim of surprise. Takeaway: a formal pre-meeting records demand under state HOA law compels the board to respond publicly and on the record. Silence or deflection at a public meeting can itself be used as evidence of bad faith. My attorney also coordinated carefully with the USPS investigator, who had by now developed an independent case based on my original complaint, Teresa's carrier log, and additional evidence gathered during their own investigation. The investigator did not make promises, but when my attorney mentioned the date and location of the annual meeting, she asked a single question: "What time does it start?" She asked with the flat professional neutrality of someone who already knew the answer and was asking for other reasons entirely. Wendell insisted on bringing pecan cookies. "People stay when they're comfortable," he said. "People leave when they're not. You want everyone in that room for the whole meeting." I did not argue with this logic. Wendell has never been wrong about anything involving people. Constance knew something was coming. She didn't know what, but she could feel the shape of it. 2 weeks before the annual meeting, she activated her Facebook group. The post was long, 4 careful paragraphs, and written in the passive-aggressive grammar of someone who has spent a career composing disciplinary memos. It spoke of a disgruntled homeowner attempting to weaponize the annual meeting to destabilize community governance. It referenced volunteer board members who give their time and energy for the good of the community, being subjected to harassment and intimidation. It linked to an article about HOA activist homeowners creating unnecessary legal costs for associations. It ended with, "We all benefit from stable, experienced leadership." She did not name me. She didn't need to. 47 people commented. 32 of them were not supportive. Homeowners who hadn't spoken publicly in years surfaced with grievances that had apparently been accumulating like sediment. The pool resurfacing that had been budgeted and deferred for 3 consecutive years. The playground equipment replacement that kept getting pushed to next fiscal year. The landscaping contract that changed vendors twice in 18 months with no explanation. And $1,100 administrative fee that appeared on the annual budget with no line-item justification. The comments piled up faster than Constance could manage them. She deleted the post at 11:47 p.m. Screenshots, as they say, are eternal. I had 14 of them by morning. Then she made a phone call. Diane, Marcus's wife, the board member Constance had excluded from the emergency meeting, received the call on a Wednesday evening. The substance, as she relayed it to me through Marcus the following day. Constance offered to withdraw all pending violation actions against 4 specific homeowners if Diane would support a motion to table the financial review until a proper independent audit could be arranged. Diane had recorded the call on her cell phone. She sent the recording to my attorney that afternoon. My attorney listened to it twice, said nothing for a moment, and then said, "She just handed us everything." Attempting to induce a board member to cast a favorable vote in exchange for withdrawing enforcement actions against specific residents is, at minimum, a breach of fiduciary duty under Ohio law and potentially tortious interference. The recording went into the evidence file. The forensic accountant was notified to preserve all communications related to her engagement. With 1 week to go, Constance tried one more thing. The evening before the annual meeting, someone removed the printed agenda notices from the community clubhouse window and the common area bulletin board. Under the CC&Rs, these notices were required to be posted 48 hours in advance of any homeowners meeting. Without them, there was a potential argument, thin but arguable, that the meeting hadn't been properly noticed and any votes taken could be challenged. The security camera footage from the clubhouse parking lot was not perfectly clear, but the white Cadillac SUV visible at the edge of the frame, at 9:43 p.m. on a Friday night, was not ambiguous. I had anticipated this possibility 3 weeks earlier. My attorney had sent individual meeting notices via certified mail with return receipts directly to all 140 homeowners. I had every postal receipt. The meeting was properly noticed, regardless of whether the bulletin board postings existed. The attempted sabotage accomplished nothing, except adding another item to a file that was already overwhelming. Constance spent the final days before the meeting trying to shore up her board. She reached 4 of her 11 remaining allies by phone. 3 called back and canceled. The 4th stopped answering after the second call. 7 years of cultivated loyalty, evaporating in 4 days. It turns out that when people realize the ship has a hole in it, they assess how close they are to the water before they decide whether to stay loyal to the captain. I ran into Mrs. Ketterer at the grocery store the afternoon before the meeting. She was moving slowly with her cart, reading the back of a soup can with the focused attention of someone who takes nutrition labels seriously. I told her she didn't need to come to the meeting, that things might get tense. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Broderick," she said, "I was a union steward at the Timken plant for 22 years. I know what tense looks like." She put the soup can in her cart. "I'll bring my folding chair." I bagged her groceries and carried them to her car. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from the USPS investigator. 4 words, "We'll be in the area." I stared at it for a long time. Then I put the phone in my pocket, set my coffee maker for 6 a.m., and went to bed. I arrived at the Sycamore Creek Community Clubhouse at 6 p.m. The meeting started at 7. I had an hour. The clubhouse is a beige, single-story building with industrial carpet the color of old mustard, drop-ceiling tiles that have been slightly wrong since 2009, and a whiteboard that still had someone's March landscaping committee notes on it. It is not a glamorous space. It has hosted 7 years of HOA meetings, at which Constance Birchfield Holt stood at the front of the room and ran every single one of them exactly the way she wanted them to run. Tonight was going to be different. I set up a folding table near the door and stacked the 30 copies of the financial discrepancy report, cover page, BCH payment log, Secretary of State registration, Gretchen's one-page executive summary. Neat stacks, easy to grab. I plugged in the wireless speaker I'd borrowed from Wendell because the room had the acoustic quality of a gymnasium, and I wanted every single person to hear every single word. I connected my laptop to the clubhouse's wall-mounted 55-inch flat screen, the one that usually displayed HOA announcements and the pool hours, and loaded the presentation. 3 slides. That was all I needed. By 6:45 p.m., the room had more people in it than any HOA meeting in recent memory. Wendell counted heads from his seat near the door. 74 homeowners. The previous attendance record was 31 for a heated 2018 debate about extending pool hours on weekends. People were standing along the back wall. The pecan cookies were already half gone. Wendell looked vindicated. Daphne arrived at 6:50 with her manila envelope and set it on the table with deliberate visibility. Marcus and Diane arrived together. Teresa, off-duty and in her own clothes, took a seat in the 3rd row. Mrs. Ketterer unfolded her chair near the side wall and sat with the composed stillness of someone who has seen considerably worse than this. Constance arrived at 6:53. She walked in immaculate, navy blazer, reading glasses on a chain, the canvas tote bag that had become, in my mind, Exhibit A. She scanned the room with the expression of someone running rapid calculations. She saw the stacks of paper at the door. She saw Daphne's envelope. She saw my laptop connected to the TV, currently showing a blue screensaver. She saw 74 neighbors in a room that usually held 30. She sat down at the board table without saying a word. She called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. and immediately moved to add an agenda item, a governance review process that would, in effect, require the financial review to be conducted by an independent committee before any public discussion. Standard Constance. Use procedure as a weapon. Move fast. Control the agenda before anyone understands what's happening. Daphne raised her hand before the motion was seconded. Point of order. The financial review was a properly noticed agenda item served on the board 10 days in advance under ORC Section 5312.10. It could not be tabled by a board motion. It required a 2/3 vote of homeowners present. She held up the printed statute. She read the relevant section aloud. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She simply read the law in the flat, precise tone of someone who has been waiting 4 years to read it in exactly this room. 74 people looked at Constance. Constance looked at the statute, then at the room, then at the back wall. At 7:12 p.m., 2 people entered through the rear door. Plain clothes, khaki, unremarkable jackets. They did not sit down. They positioned themselves along the back wall with the unhurried stillness of people who have stood in the backs of rooms many times before. They did not introduce themselves. Teresa glanced at them, then gave me a small, barely perceptible nod. I did not react. Constance saw them. I watched her see them. Something shifted in her posture. Almost nothing, the kind of micro-adjustment you only catch if you've been watching someone carefully for a long time. She shuffled her papers. She asked for a 5-minute recess. The motion failed, no second. She straightened her blazer. She looked at the TV screen. Still blue. Still waiting. My attorney leaned toward me and said 2 words. Your call. I looked around the room. 74 neighbors. Wendell with his cookie tin. Mrs. Ketterer in her folding chair. Teresa in the 3rd row. Diane with her folder, Daphne with her envelope, Gretchen's report in 30 neat stacks by the door. 7 years of one person deciding what this neighborhood got to know. I clicked the trackpad. The slide went up. The first slide filled the screen. 2 columns. Clean. Simple. No editorial commentary required. Left column. BCH. Property Maintenance LLC. Payments from HOA Reserve Fund. 26 line items, dates, amounts, check numbers, $1,200 on a March Tuesday, $3,800 on a July Thursday, $4,400 the following February. Running total at the bottom, $43,500. Right column, documentation on file. Every single row in the right column was blank. 74 people read it simultaneously. The clubhouse went so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing in the drop ceiling above us. Someone's folding chair creaked, nothing else. Then a woman in the second row said very quietly, "That's my money." A man near the back said it louder, "That's all of our money." Someone else, "Who is BCH?" I clicked to slide 2. Ohio Secretary of State Business Registration. BCH Property Maintenance LLC. Registered agent, Constance B. Holt. UPS store box number. Date of formation, the same month she was first elected HOA board president, 7 years ago. The room did not erupt. It did something more devastating than erupt. It went through a specific, terrible silence. The kind that happens when 74 people process the same information at the same moment and arrive at the same conclusion simultaneously. You could feel the weight of it. Constance stood up. She used the voice, the school administrator's voice, the one that had ended arguments and redirected conversations in this room for 7 consecutive years. She said the documents were misleading. She said there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. She said this was not the appropriate forum and that the board had a responsibility to protect the integrity of the governance process. She said the word appropriate with particular force, as though appropriateness itself was a rebuttal. Daphne opened her manila envelope. She slid a single sheet of paper to the center of the table. Ohio Attorney General's Office. Confirmation of complaint receipt. Charitable Law Section. Dated 11 days ago. 5 homeowners filed this, Daphne said. It's a matter of public record. She tapped the letter once with one finger and said nothing else. Then, Diane opened her folder. She read, without preamble, a 3-sentence summary of the phone call she had received 9 days earlier. The offer to withdraw violation notices against 4 homeowners in exchange for a vote to table the financial review. She stated that she had recorded the call. She stated that the recording had been provided to legal counsel. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Constance while she spoke. She looked at the room, at 74 neighbors who had been paying into a reserve fund for years, and she read every word clearly and without flourish. A man near the back said, "She tried to bribe a board member?" Nobody answered him. The answer was in the room. The 2 individuals from the back wall stepped forward. One of them identified herself by name and federal agency. USPS, United States Postal Inspection Service. Active investigation into mail theft and mail tampering affecting multiple residents of Sycamore Creek Estates. Not present to make an arrest tonight. Present to observe. Follow-up conversations with certain individuals would be scheduled through proper channels. She looked at Constance for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at me and gave one single professional nod. The room was completely still. Constance sat back down. She did not speak again. A motion was made by Daphne to place the HOA board president on immediate administrative leave, pending an independent forensic audit of all association finances. It required a majority vote of homeowners present, 61 in favor, 8 opposed, 5 abstentions. The vote was recorded in the minutes, which Diane was now taking, in writing, with 4 homeowners watching over her shoulder and Wendell watching over theirs. Around 9 p.m., while the meeting was still running, questions about the pool, the playground, 3 years of deferred maintenance suddenly being accounted for, I slipped out the side door. October in Ohio, cold enough to see your breath, dry enough to crackle. The smell of dead leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace 2 blocks over carried on air that felt like it had been waiting all day to get cold. I leaned against the building and listened through the thin walls to the sound of 74 people asking questions and getting answers. A neighborhood paying attention. I finished my coffee. I went back inside. The consequences arrived quickly, and they compounded. The Ohio Attorney General's Office opened a formal inquiry into the HOA Reserve Fund within 3 weeks of the annual meeting. The USPS referred its completed investigation to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Ohio, with a recommendation for charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, mail theft, and Section 1702, obstruction of correspondence. Constance resigned from the HOA board 10 days after the meeting by way of a 1-paragraph letter to Pinnacle that did not contain the word sorry or any variation of it. BCH Property Maintenance LLC was dissolved by the state of Ohio 23 days after the AG complaint was filed. The civil suit, brought on behalf of the HOA by its newly elected board, sought recovery of the $43,500 plus interest and legal fees. It settled 18 months later for $51,200. My own situation was more complicated. The $14,000 contract I'd lost when my mail was intercepted, that client had moved on. And the honest truth is that some things you don't fully get back. But my attorney sent a demand letter documenting the provable causal link between the mail theft and the lost contract. The civil settlement included a separate $9,500 payment to me as part of a broader release. I put it toward a new piece of equipment for the business. I kept working. The new HOA board held its first fully transparent budget meeting 2 months after the annual meeting. The reserve fund was formally reconciled. The pool resurfacing, deferred 3 years, budgeted, and then quietly redirected, was funded and scheduled for spring. The playground equipment finally got a contractor. Mrs. Ketterer was appointed to the Architectural Review Committee. She accepted, and I have every confidence she is running it exactly the way it should be run. At the spring block party, resurrected after a 3-year Constance-era ban on large gatherings generating noise complaints, I spotted Teresa finishing her Saturday route at the edge of the party. She was still in her carrier uniform. I brought her a plate of food. She stayed for an hour. When she finally headed back to her truck, she paused and said, "I kept that log for 2 years thinking someone was going to ask." I told her someone finally did. She nodded and walked back to her truck. I watched her go and thought about all the people who do their jobs quietly and carefully and honestly for years, keeping their logs, trusting that it will eventually matter. It matters. Here is the thing about Constance that I keep coming back to. She wasn't unique. The specific shape of her corruption was particular to her, but the conditions that produced her, 7 years without accountability, a position of minor authority treated as absolute power, a neighborhood too exhausted or too polite to push back, those conditions exist everywhere. In HOAs and condo boards and local government and workplace hierarchies, petty power is everywhere, and petty power depends, above everything else, on isolation. The moment people start talking to each other, comparing notes, pulling records and reading statutes, and showing up to meetings, it starts to collapse under its own weight. The settlement funds, after legal fees, left the HOA with enough to fully replenish the reserve and allocate $8,000 to a community initiative proposed by Claudette at the next board meeting. A scholarship fund for graduating seniors from the local public high school, whose families lived in the development. First year, 2 recipients. Second year, 4. The fund was named, by quiet consensus, at a meeting Constance was not present for, the Sycamore Creek Community Scholars Award. The first checks were handed out in the community clubhouse. Same industrial carpet, same slightly wrong ceiling tiles. 60 people attended. Wendell brought cookies. Now, I mentioned Wendell was a retired postal worker. What I didn't mention was what Wendell did when he discovered his property taxes had been incorrectly assessed for 6 years, and why the county assessor is no longer employed by the county. That story involves a spreadsheet, a real estate appraiser, and one county commissioner who really should have checked whether the meeting was being recorded. That one's coming.
Here's what nobody said out loud. Reynaldo didn't win a single round because he had real authority. He weren't a leader because 7 families were tired, because leader is scary word when you've spent 30 years building a quibi. Because sometimes people pay not to solve a problem, just to make it leave the porch. That's the whole bet. Not the law, just so exhaustion. Desmond didn't do anything Mozart couldn't do. He read the paperwork. He made forecasts. He wrote down names and dates. For 30 days, that's it. $4,600 recovered. 1 LLC permanently dissolved, and a white Volvo quietly disappearing from a parking lot while 200 people stood around a bonfire and finally exhaled. No dramatic speech, no cultural moment, just a biter on the table and a woman who ran down a runway. I will ask you something strange. If that letter show up in your mailbox tomorrow, do you know what your first move would be? Not what you feel, what you actually do. Drop it in the comments. I want to know. If this one hit close to home, share it with someone living under an HOA right now. They need to see it more than you do. Subscribe for more. We've got a lot more where it came from. And remember this, petty powers only works on people who don't know they can pass back.